right, so what is it that is making us so excited right now about generative AI and large language models, or LLMs, compared to the older kind of AI tools that have been around for decades? And I love tools like expert systems, and there are these other traditional machine learning approaches that are also AI. Particularly when we talk about tools like ChatGPT, we're really excited about how easy they are to interact with. You can just open up ChatGPT, you start typing in natural language, and it gives you something back. And often that thing can be very helpful and very useful. Another feature that's really important is the fact that they don't require training. So we call that zero-shot learning. The training has already all happened. They're pre-trained models, and they tend to be really good at a lot of different kinds of tasks out of the box. We don't have to spend hours, hundreds of hours doing the training or gathering really good training data to use for these tools. They're very cheap as well. Part of that comes from the fact we don't have to do all of that training by hand, but you can run a query for a fraction of a penny and get back results in seconds. What are some of the things that we can actually do with these in access to justice in this space? So one of the ways I think is safest for us to think about is tools that are going to help helpers. That could include drafting code. I use it for that purpose all the time. So if you think of all of the things that we produce, whether they're websites, guided interviews, literally computer code that we're writing, generative AI models can help us with that task and create drafts we can edit and improve. It can also help with content that goes on a website, but I think we have to be really careful about how we do those kind of tasks. Another function they have is extracting information. This may be one that not everybody is as familiar with, but if you provide the large language model, if you give ChatGPT, for example, a set of unstructured notes from an interview that you had with a client, and you ask it to pull out the 10 things that you think that those notes might have, like the name of the different parties, what the central issue is in that set of notes, it can do that really well. It can classify. This is something that we've seen with e-discovery tools that required expensive training again. And it turns out that out of the box, a lot of these generative AI models can do a very good first pass at classifying, saying this block of text has this property, it is responsive or not responsive to the discovery request. It might need a rubric, for example. I use that for that kind of work inside my classroom. Another way that we've found this limit of document automation where you have to come up with the questions in advance. When you have a tool like a large language model, you can actually have it guide the person who's giving an answer to have a deeper reflection. You can say, hey, you didn't touch on this important part of the story that you need to tell the judge. I'm going to ask some follow-up questions until you get back a complete response. I use that, again, with my students to help them make sure that they're giving reflections that are responsive to the readings and to what I hope they're getting out of the reflections. Translating, simplifying, summarizing, synthesizing. These are all functions where we're putting lots of information into the model, and we want it to just change the information we gave it. We're not asking it to create new information from scratch. So that might mean translating into plain language. A prompt like, rewrite this text so it's readable at a 6th grade reading level and it doesn't use passive voice. That's one I use with ChatGPT all the time. It can translate into other languages, and it does that in a way that retains the intention and purpose and the syntax of the language in a much better way than Google Translate could do, for example. It can summarize, it can create these short summaries, and it can actually take lots of different pieces of information that you feed it and then put them together into a whole cohesive narrative. And you can think of the functions that lawyers do. We were often trying to do that, right? We're trying to tell a story from lots of facts. That's something that we can do with large language models. Another very safe use is these chat interfaces to vetted knowledge bases. There was a really interesting paper that was presented at the URIX conference that we were at just last month, talking about Cornell law students using it to build a question and answer tool for housing questions. And the interesting thing is that you have this chat interface. The large language model is helping make it easy for the person to ask their questions, but it goes to a vetted knowledge base, and you can moderate the answers and say, this is a good answer, give this one more often when the question looks something like this. And you don't have to use really rigid rules to put it together. You can let the large language model be the interface between your knowledge base and the way that the person asks those questions. These tools are not perfect, and they have risks. So we know that some of these are very important risks. they have embedded bias. So when we're thinking about tasks we want to use large language models for, we have to be aware they're going to reflect the training data, which is full of biases against roles that people play, women and men. For example, if you ask it a question and you just use the words nurse and doctor, it's going to assign genders to those terms in a way that's unexpected and that can't really be moderated out of the tool as it exists right now. It's not a database of facts. There's some ways you can use it safely for factual information, but it's not really a good tool to ask, what is the holding of a case in this federal case, for example? That is not a really well in already something that most people know the answer to. It's not going to give you a good answer. There's some privacy risks we have to keep in mind. Those are not such strong risks anymore as they were when ChatGPT, for example, first came out. We know the terms of use have been updated to make some of the risks that you're giving much smaller. There's a knowledge cutoff. If you are trying to use it for factual information, you have to keep that in mind, that it may be a year out of date. And this is something that I've run into, which is this additional risk, which is the fact that there is some safety measures in the tool, the moderation, means that for some of the tasks that are really sensitive and important, things like, let's say we take that task of rewriting instructions about how to get a domestic violence protection order, for example. It may refuse to do that because it sees terms in your question that are flagging the moderation. So that's a limitation that just means we can't use it for some kind of task and expect it to always work. Given the use cases, all the benefits, obviously, I think those risks are worth overcoming. So some of the ways that we can really improve the results and use it the most safely is when we give it the facts that we want it to know in advance. This image here is representing the fact that we can really think of it as being like a funnel. If we want to get good results out of ChatGPT or large language models in general, whether that's BARD or you're using the API, we want to give it lots more information than we hope to get out. That's one of the most important things to do. And this approach of retrieval is one that we're seeing with the Lexis and the Westlaw integrations of generative AI. They're not just going to the full model. They're giving answers that are restricted to the actual cases that are in the database. First, they find the case, and then they ask the tool to summarize that case, for example. There's so many things that we do that don't depend on factual accuracy. So those are great tasks for generative AI. We always have to review the output carefully, because there are still what the kind of call cutely hallucinations that are going to come in even with some of these safer tasks. So we have to be experts when we're using it to be able to review the information that's coming out of it. And we have to remember that invisible bias that may not always be clear on the face. If we're trying to use it for tasks like evaluation or trying to rank resumes, for example, that may not be such a good task for any of the machine learning models unless we're really able to understand how to remove that bias. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Margaret.
So probably many of you have had discussions with your colleagues or in some of the working groups as part of SRLN or LSNTAP or other communities about if and how AI, generative AI, can really make a difference in your organization, user-facing tools and otherwise. There are, and I'm not going to get into all the details, some great documentation about a list of those tasks that are kind of near-term, possibly high-impact, lower-risk tasks that have come out of these kind of workshop sessions, including one that I co-ran with the SRLN network. So just to flag that there is this community that's profiling and trying to make clear to our computer science and engineer colleagues, here are some ripe tasks for collaboration between the justice system and those working on generative AI. Those include some that can improve how legal aid and court self-help providers improve their service offerings, communicate better to the public, triage and screen people in more efficient ways. Also, tools to actually put in the hands of pro bono volunteers, paralegals, lawyers, and members of the public to write better documents, to issue spot better, to better prepare for important hearings and trials. And then even more back-end management, coaching, business planning, policy making. So this conversation is going on, and we'd welcome you, if you're interested in this, to join those conversations and help us really represent what that first generation of potential AI tasks are. One thing that we've been doing at Stanford Legal Design Lab in partnership with the LSE TIG team, who's been our client for our policy lab class at the law school is interviewing people. We've been going in person to court self-help centers in Santa Clara County, as well as interviewing people online. And we've talked to 43 people now about if and how they would use AI for addressing their legal problems. In fact, we've given them a fictional scenario, a possible eviction notice, and then watched over their shoulder to see if and how, when we asked them, would you want to try Google Bard or ChatGPT or Microsoft Bing Chat? Do you want to engage with this? If yes, let's watch how they actually use it. What kind of things do they put in? Do they find it helpful or not? Are they seeing hallucinations or not? Do they trust this information? So it's a small sample, 43 people, but in these half-hour interviews, we've learned a lot. A few of the findings that I'll pull out now. After people have used one of these popular AI platforms, they are saying, many people, 6 out of 6, I will definitely use this for future legal problem solving. After that experience, we see a big change that even if before they use the AI, they might have suspicions or worries about it, many of them perceive it to be quite helpful. In the middle, we see people who are putting more generic prompts in, like tenants' rights. They don't get a lot of detailed information. But if they put more 1 or 2 sentences in about my landlord gave me the scary notice, I live in this county, what should I do? The information they're getting back, these kind of step-by-step guidance with some amount of referrals, they trust it. Not everyone trusts it completely, but you can see the before and after. Before they've actually used the AI tool, we ask them, how much would you trust what AI would tell you if you asked it about a legal problem? And we see this kind of mixed area. A lot of people say 0 out of 6, I wouldn't trust it at all. The majority say 3 out of 6, I would cautiously think about trusting it. Very few people say 6 out of 6, I would definitely trust AI. But after they have an initial experience with it, you can see those numbers going up, where more people are saying 3, 4, 5, and the majority have said 6 out of 6. I definitely trust this information. It seems reliable. It seems to jibe with what my priors were. And the way it's presented, it seems very authoritative. So I'm not going to make a judgment about whether this is good or bad, but it's just the new reality that as more people learn and hear about these tools and integrate them into their problem solving, this is the reality that is going to be facing us in the next few years. More people will be going to these tools. In addition to interviewing normal people, we've also been interviewing, including some of you in the room, 21 different justice professionals, people who work on the front lines of legal aid, court help, and other clinics, and asked them, how should we be evaluating these AI systems, especially in this, what we think is a very prominent use case, when people go for a question and answer session, to kind of get a feel of, do I have any rights? What should I do? And we've heard from the professionals that it's not just about measuring hallucinations, though that might be getting the headlines when we talk about AI and legal. Getting the facts wrong or hallucinating a case, yes, obviously is a concern, but we should be measuring other things to see if these AI systems are actually doing a good job producing quality. We should be looking at presentation. We should be looking about what content is actually included in what the AI is telling people. What is the quality of that information? Is it correct and robust? Are people informed about the risks and safety measures around using AI? Do they know how to protect themselves when they're using an AI tool? And the equity concerned. Is the data being shown biased or worse for some jurisdictions than other jurisdictions? What we found from our subject matter expert interviews, is that yes, all of those quality factors are important. What justice professionals have said are the most important things when we rate these AI tools and screen them for whether they're good and safe. Are they giving people plain language information? Are they giving information that's not toxic? Are they avoiding any misrepresentations of the law, whether that's a completely hallucinated law or a law for another jurisdiction that they're telling you mistakenly, or an outdated law that no longer applies, but no misrepresentations of law, and also no misrepresentations of forms. What's the right form to be using? Or a document assembly tool. Don't misrepresent those too or send people to the wrong one. Some other highly rated 5 out of 6 importance that justice professionals have said is that when we evaluate AI, we should be looking at lack of bias, no misrepresentations of procedural steps, and also that the information is not overly generic, that it's not so vague as to not be helpful. Also important, good visual design, that it's sourced from groups that are run by legal experts, that it has clear handoffs to papers and tools and actionable steps, and that it's jurisdiction specific. So our lab is now using these metrics to now run audits of the most popular platforms where we can see people going, ChatGPT, Bard, and Bing, and evaluating not just how many hallucinations might be on these platforms when people ask them normal legal questions, but also how they rate on all these other factors. So we're going to be running this audit. Stay tuned. If you have any thoughts, though, on measuring and kind of making a declaration about whether these tools are doing a good job or bad job, we're thick in the middle of setting up this audit. So please put that in your Q&A or come up and talk to me later. With that, though, I'm going to hand it off to go in on a few specific AI and A2J tools. So I'm going to hand it off to Quentin first, and then Hannes is going to present. I'll just remind you, any Q&A, please put in the app. Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to try to do a little bit of live demo, and I have some slides as a backup, because sometimes demos don't work. Let's see. Actually, I'm going to just show you a quick slide first to introduce what I'm talking about here. So a lot of us here in this space, LSC has been funding these document automation projects for decades. It's something that is really important to me and that I work on quite a bit. So the question is, can we get some synthesis between those tools? Can we kind of get the best of both worlds? Can we have the safety of expert systems that have pre-programmed paths and questions that we can test and make sure are usable with usability tests and usability expert review? And also get the freedom and the fluidity of the ChatGPT large language model approach? I think the answer is yes. Here's 4 ways that we're doing it right now today. So I talked a little bit about that asking follow-up questions. If you think about a really open-ended question that you might see on a form, something like, tell us why you need a restraining order. You can imagine breaking that up into 10 or 15 questions in advance, but maybe you're going to be forcing that person to retell their story or uncomfortably fit it into those boxes. If you leave them the big open question, you're going to be having a really high chance that they're missing information. Large language models allow us to ask the follow-up questions appropriately, and just like a person would be talking to someone across the table, have a more conversational approach to getting the right information. I talked about extraction already. A little bit earlier, I talked about transforming. And this other really important task that we've been doing right now is actually using the large language model, giving it a form, like a letter or a court document, without any pre-annotation, just saying, here's the form, turn this into a guided interview. Now, what does that do? It immediately says, we can get a prototype of that and start reacting to it right away. That's a step that we can always do for any form. It might take us 4 or 5 hours to get to that first runnable prototype. It's going to be in rough shape. You can get that out of the box with the large language model, with the way that we've integrated tools around it. And then you need to do a lot of refining. That might be 5 hours out of an 80-hour project, but that's 5 hours that you get to start getting feedback from stakeholders right away. So I'm going to switch to the demo now. Let's see. Oops, sorry. It's the same screen here. All right. I'm going to make this a little larger for everybody so you can see it a little bit better. Actually, it's not using the same menu options. What's the shortcut for me to do that? Oh, maybe I just have to hold function and control. Oh, thank you. Thanks. All right, we'll keep it that size. All right, so let's take a very small toy example. Let's say that we wanted to ask somebody about why they qualified for the warranty of habitability as a grounds for relief in an eviction case, let's say. This is not a really great example. It's not really one of those super open-ended questions, but I wanted to show you something that we could demo quickly. So these are the factors I've listed here, and this is what I've actually given to the large language model to say, evaluate this response to see if it has all of these factors, or if there's a response to judge if the person qualifies. It's just trying to say, do they provide information about all of these factors? So let's say I just said something, bed bugs. I haven't met all 3 of the factors here. Again, it's going to be a live demo. It's always a little nerve-wracking here. So it's asking me a follow-up question. It said, I haven't hit that other second prong. I haven't talked about the notice requirement. If I want, this is not necessarily how we present it. This is just showing you what's happening underneath the hood. You can show me what I've said so far. And it's asking me this to give some information about the notice issue. And I might just say yes. And we can tailor the prompt that we give it. It might actually, this is interesting, I've let it be a little bit creative. It might think that's good enough. At least I've said something about all of them. But it's asking me a little bit more detail, which is good. That's what actually I would prefer. No, the landlord hasn't done anything to fix the problem. This one's a little weird, I'm gonna have to say. But this is the kind of thing you work out a little bit with testing with real users. I think maybe it doesn't quite understand that framing of actual or constructive notice. Now, something you can play around with. So now I've gotten more information, right? And I could just take that transcript of that conversation and put that in the form. And that's a very safe thing to do, obviously. I've also given the tool a prompt to rewrite my response so it makes sense as one whole response. So you see that here as a possible draft response. And you can see it's using punctuation and grammar. And if I click continue, I've prompted it to actually create a demand letter based on what I've told it so far. And you might decide that's a good use, or you might decide that's a very unsafe use. Obviously, what can we do with document automation? We can put that paragraph into a letter that we've pre-written and that we know uses the right citations to the law. Or we can just give it to ChatGPT, and it's written this 2-page letter here, which is a demand letter that asks the landlord to fix the problem based on what I've said. Actually not a bad law. And I did give it this prompt. In the prompt, I've told it to use Massachusetts law. And that's not visible in the test that I just did. But that is in the background, the prompt. This is, here's the prompt actually here. Okay, moving on to talking about that example of someone giving information. You maybe have those unstructured notes. Another thing you might do is, this actually feedback that I received on an eviction tool I developed, made just this past week. Someone said, your tool was really long and asked a lot of questions, and I didn't get to say the thing that I wanted to say. And I think that's an experience people have with document automation tools, right? They want to tell their story first. And it's certainly an experience that you have when you're doing live intakes with somebody. You're going to have that experience of them wanting to just dump all the information about their case before you can ask those kind of probing follow-up questions. Let's say you wanted to let them do that, but you didn't want to have the tool draft those responses questions. You could pre-draft the questions, and you can ask it to just give you the pre-written questions for the things that they didn't already answer. So this is the prompt here, tell us your life story. But actually, I only want their name, address, and their favorite movie. And I'm going to let it ask me some follow-up questions only if the information is not in there. I'll just keep this short, so we're running a little bit late. Let's stick with the bedbug example. That's not relevant, right? But notice I've only answered the favorite movie question in kind of an ambiguous way. And we will see that the large language model can pull that out anyway. But I haven't given it my name or address, and it's going to ask me, I hope, for those 2 questions. So this is a question I wrote that's in the document automation tool. It's not generated by ChatGPT, but it knows it's an unanswered question. And same with the address question. But it's figured out that my favorite movie is Blues Brothers from that kind of ambiguous response that I gave. You couldn't pull that out with regular expressions or other kinds of rules-based approaches. Okay, one more thing. Well, what does it mean when we're talking about translation? Obviously, one example is, let's say someone uploads information from a contract, and you can say, explain this to me. That's one way, kind of translation. It could also mean literal language translation, and this is a use case to evaluate really carefully. But let's say you have an interview that's translated into Spanish. You're asking the person questions in Spanish, and they give you those responses in Spanish, but you want to send a letter or produce a court form in English. Could you do that? Something to evaluate. But it will certainly do a good job of that translation. And I'm going to try to, let's stick with something like very simple I can translate, which is just bed bugs I know are chinches. And I'm going to just send that one little bit of information to it. And it's going to translate it for me. So let's say you wanted that response in English, you could do this, and certainly you should have both side by side, but it may be helpful to the person receiving the information. Okay, that's my demo, and I'm going to give the rest of the time to Hans.
Great. All right, so I'm Hannes Westerman. I'm at the CyberJust lab at Université Montréal and McGill. And as part of my postdoc at McGill University, I've been exploring how to use generative AI to increase access to justice in a safe way and useful way. A part of the issues that we're trying to address is that, well, laymen have trouble resolving everyday legal issues, and some of the reasons that contribute to this could be, for example, not understanding the law. And the JustSpot that I'll show in a bit will try to address that. And then the cost of going to court. Even if you know the law, it might be difficult to go to court and resolve this and take a long time and be complicated. And so the first thing you might ask is, well, we have ChatGPT, right? Why don't we just ask ChatGPT directly what the law means and how it applies to a situation? So try to do this. Here I asked it to give me information about a water leak in my apartment under Quebec law, the Civil Code of Quebec. And here's an answer that looks great. The articles are there, the information is there, and so on. But if I do look at this in detail, you will realize that this is quite wrong. It looks great, but if you look at the detail, you see that the article number for the first one is wrong. And after that, it mixed articles together or even made up stuff that sounded like it might be there, but it was not actually there. So that could be a problem. And we explore this in this paper, ChatGPT as an artificial lawyer, and compared it to responses given by the JustSpot. So the JustSpot is another approach to this that I want to show you. And it asks users questions to understand the dispute and then provides legal information and next steps based on the answer and in an online easy-to-use tool. And we deploy this first version in the domain of landlord-tenant disputes. So working with the Housing Court of Quebec, the Tribunal Administratif Logement, which received around 70,000 claims per year. So this is certainly an area where there's a lot of people in need of kind of information and to resolve their disputes. Just to quickly show you what this looks like. This is in French, but I'll narrate what's going on. So since Quebec is a French jurisdiction, first we get a disclaimer page with a lot of information telling it us what it can do and what it can't do. And then the system tries to narrow down the issue. So first it asks, are you a landlord or a tenant? Let's say in this case, we're a landlord and our tenant is pretty much always late with paying their rent, and we're not sure which rights we have or if we have any rights in fact. So we'll say propriétaire here, which means landlord. And we now get a list of potential issues that the systems can treat. And we'll select here the tenant will not pay their rent. And so next we get more in-depth questions such as, is the tenant currently late with paying their rent? We can answer with an explanation in simplified language and link to legislation. We can say that this is not the case, upon which we're asked, is the tenant frequently late with paying their rent? Now, frequently is, of course, an open textured legal term. It doesn't really define what this means, so here we use case examples to help the reader understand what was previously meant by this by judges, and based upon this, they can then decide, yes, in my case, actually, I do think there is frequent lateness of rent and also a serious prejudice caused. So based on these answers, the system will now analyze my responses and give me information here, such as what my rights may be. I might be able to terminate the lease and some previous cases where this may have been the case. And I can also move on to see the possible next steps that I can undertake to address this issue, such as contacting a lawyer, getting more help, or going to court. I want to highlight here that the system never tells you what you should be doing. It only tells you what rights you may have, what possibilities you can have, and then leaves it up to the user to kind of respond to this and to act upon this information. So that's the JusticeBot, and this is quite different from ChatGPT. So instead of having this large language models in the background, this runs purely on this kind of symbolic system. So here you will see kind of the brain behind the JusticeBot. As you can see here, it's quite simple to see. There are these blocks that are screens that we saw on the JusticeBot, and there's arrows connecting them, which means that it's very easy for legal experts to build these systems, but also to verify at every stage that the information given is correct. And that, I think, is one of the big differences here with this approach, is that we always know exactly what the user will see and how they will interact with the system. So there's no risk of hallucinations here, and you can verify that the system makes sense and is accurate. And this we deployed in Quebec together with our partners, the landlord, le Tribunal du Logement, and financed by the Ministère de l'Économie et Innovation de Québec, and it's been used around 30,000 times since summer 2021. Now, you may ask, great, so why are we talking about this? This is about generative AI, and that's a good question. As I mentioned before, there's this comparison, like what's the better approach? And we saw here that, of course, JusticeBot gives information that is accurate, that's verified, but ChatGPT also has a lot of advantages, of course. It is very good at adjusting information, and it is very good at communicating very naturally with the user. So I think that's what's really interesting here, is seeing how can we combine these two approaches together to get the benefits of both. So instead of looking at them as competing approaches, I think the interesting thing is looking at them as a combined approach. Really, how can we merge these two together in a way that allows us to keep these advantages? So we've started exploring this. This is a paper we published last summer, Bridging the Gap. And the idea here is that we can map layperson narratives to the legal issues inside the JusticeBot using generative AI. So this is what that looks like. A user can describe the issue in their own terms, like we saw in Quentin's demo, and it will then suggest to them, based on these facts, a pathway that the user may want to explore. But it's just a suggestion again. So here we see the user writing, it's cold in my apartment. And based on this, the system says, it seems like you may have heating issues. In this case, explore if the landlord fulfills their obligation. So the user can say, yeah, exactly, that's exactly what I'm looking for. They can click on this. Or they can say, no, that's not quite relevant. I'm going to go through the rest of the system instead. But if they do click that, they're still staying inside of this verified information given by the system. Another way is another paper that we published this December from Text to Structure, which is exploring if we can use ChatGPT and GPT-4 to build these pathways. So here on the left, you see a legal article that contains some requirements and some criteria. And on the right, you see a kind of legal pathway that was generated purely by ChatGPT based on this article. So it's converted this into this logical representation that we can use as the basis for a pathway. So building this pathway, which obviously takes quite a long time, can here be accomplished to some extent by ChatGPT. And even if it's not always perfect, it can always serve as a basis for a user to verify this, to make sure that it's accurate, and to continue building on this to build this into a JusticeBot system that can then be used by the user. So there's some exciting ways there, I think, of providing legal information. And next I want to talk about the LL Mediator, which is the system or an investigation of if large language models and generative AI can be used to support the parties and mediator in an online dispute resolution platform. So once the user realizes that they have a dispute or a legal problem, they may want to settle this, or they may want to negotiate with the other party to see if they can find agreement. And here we built the LL Mediator, which is this tool to explore to which extent ChatGPT and GPT-4 can help out with this inside such a platform. So I'm going to do a live demo of this as well. Here you see this very basic interface. It is kind of a chat interface. This is purely experimental at this stage. Let's say there's a dispute between Jane and John here. Jane thinks that John broke the door. Hey, you broke my door. When will you pay me? And you can send this. It's a very natural chat interface. John does not at all agree. I did not break the door. It was already totally broken. So that's a dispute. It's kind of maybe they're not agreeing, and maybe the conversation starts to get a bit heated at this point. So Jane says, "You idiot. It is clear that you broke the door. I will see you in court." The issue is now, if she sends this, that might kind of derail the conversation, right? It's hard for them after that to get back to this constructive path of trying to find agreement. So let's see what happens if she tries to send this. So the system has realized that this might contain strong language. We'd love to suggest a more neutral formulation. So it looks at this message and it tries to suggest a way of phrasing this in a more kind and more neutral way. So it says, "It appears there is some disagreement about the damage to the door. It would be beneficial for us to discuss this calmly and try to reach an understanding. I believe we're both aiming for a fair resolution. Let's consider discussing this before engaging in legal proceedings." So the idea is here, it tries to maintain the context of the message, kind of what she's trying to say, but phrased it in a different way. But importantly here, Jane is given the choice. It doesn't tell her what she has to do. It says you have the option now of still keeping with your message, or you can look at the suggestion, change it if you want, but you can send this instead, which might be more beneficial for this discussion. Let's see, yeah, she agrees with this, so sends this message. But John does not believe in this. He says, "I disagree." That's true, and I think it's a very good point. I mean, this is a prototype and something to explore, and maybe Jane did want to communicate this emotion. In that case, she has the option to change that, of course, but maybe this suggestion can get her to put a bit more nuance in how she expresses that. Let's say John says here, "Disagree," and maybe here it's kind of in a deadlock now, so we might want to have a mediator enter this discussion and try to see if they can help them get into a good direction. And so what the mediator can do, they can of course write a message here, but what's also possible is to ask ChatGPT to write a possible intervention that they may want to take to address this discussion. So it now reads the message of the parties and it suggests an intervention. So it says, "John, I understand that you have a difference of opinion. Nevertheless, it's crucial for both of you to have an open dialogue about the issue. It is in both of your best interest to discuss this calmly and reasonably to avoid more serious consequences. Let's have a constructive conversation around what both of you believe happened. Jane, can you provide any further details or evidence about the damage? John, are you able to share more about your perspective too?" So this might not be a perfect message. I think it does a decent job of trying to kind of look at the facts, see what get them to share their perspective while maintaining this tone. Might not be exactly what the mediator wants to say, but they have the option here, of course, of providing additional instructions or of editing this and changing it if they want. But seeing this might help them be more efficient and be a bit more quicker in deciding how to intervene here. And I do want to highlight here what's going on is that we have not trained this model at all. The thing we did was we told ChatGPT, "You are a mediator. Try to get these parties to settle their dispute in an amicable way." And based on these, basically that was it. And based on these very short instructions, without any additional training data, it was able to read the messages of the parties, understand the context of this dispute, and suggest an intervention that kind of makes sense in that context. I think that is something that illustrates kind of the potential here of how strong these models are in understanding these things and coming up with reasonable solutions. And eventually, in both of these cases, there was a human in the loop. Eventually, you might even get this to a stage where you can have the system intervene by itself and write a message. But that is definitely, I think, a more experimental approach where you would need to do a lot more verifications before doing that. Just to wrap up briefly, you saw the JusticeBot and the LL Mediator. The LL Mediator is this experimental platform to investigate the use of LLMs in online resolution. And it used this approach that I think is really important here of augmented intelligence. So it doesn't try to replace the human or tell the human what to do. It merely tries to enhance kind of the way they can use these systems by suggesting ways of formulating their message in a more constructive way or suggesting messages to the mediator that they may want to say. And the same for the JusticeBot, right? It, again, doesn't try to use AI to tell the user what they should be doing. It merely suggests ways to them and also suggests ways to the creator of the JusticeBot systems to that they may want to put these pathways to support them in building these tools. I think it's a really promising avenue. I think these models have a ton of potential, but there's also a lot of work left here to verify how often they work, where they don't work, if we can make them better, and in which context they can be used safely. But I think this is the great forum for this, and I think that leads to our brainstorming session, which is, I think, really looking forward to exploring what you think about this and what might be some ways of doing that. So thank you.
I just wanted to highlight, I skipped the whole section of the slides talking about how we're using these to draft these traditional document animations. So I want to just highlight that is a capability that we're using today. It can go from the form to the live guided interview as a draft. Some questions came in from the chat about voice access and accessibility. And you are creating a guided interview using the same accessibility features that it has with the demos I showed. A really interesting thing that we have not tried is the voice to text and text to voice mode that ChatGPT and the GPT-4 API have too. That is a great way to extend these tools to let people respond by speaking to the form and having it, again, do the same thing of pulling out the answers, the part of the answer that applies to the specific form. I also want to say we are happy to keep this conversation going. So I think you'll find our emails on the Google form and you can reach out to us that way or with the Cvent app. And I'm starting to go through some of your other great questions in the Q&A, and we're going to try to do those offline asynchronously. And so check in if your question hasn't been answered yet.
Yeah, well, I think, my closing thoughts would be like, I think these models are here now. They are very powerful. I don't think they'll go away. They'll only get more powerful. And I'm now no doubt that they will be used in access justice context and are probably already being used. But I think as we saw, there are good and bad uses currently. And I think it's very important to distinguish between the two and kind of understand how they can be used in a way that is productive and safe. But that's why I'm so excited to be here today and to see all of you, because I feel like in working with hands-on with these issues, I think you are in a really good place to think about this and to contribute to this discussion of how we can use the model to a great effect and to do really interesting things while also keeping it safe. So I hope you will keep engaging in the discussion with us as well, and to see where this path kind of takes us and how we can integrate these two worlds.